What's interesting is you don't typically see waves like this of human migration in midsummer. Historically, June and July have been light months for border crossings from Mexico. It's just too hot. But this year is different. The world's poor understand that America no longer has borders. Joe Biden invited millions to come and then promised them free health care and education and housing when they arrived. So they're coming. You would too. Why wouldn't they? The migrants arriving are coming in unprecedented numbers from around the world, many thousands from Brazil alone. But they're also coming from Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, the Middle East, all over Latin America. Our country has literally never seen anything like this. The question is, what does it do for Americans? How does it improve your life or the life of any citizen here? And by the way, why should you obey our laws now that the White House has told the rest of the world it doesn't have to? No one in authority has explained any of that. And at the same time, the downsides of all of this are becoming very obvious to everybody, try as they do to squelch it. A few days ago, for example, in Minnesota, an illegal alien from Cuba beheaded a woman in broad daylight as she was sitting in traffic. Bystanders found her head in an intersection by her car. It was an awful crime, obviously, but the worst part was it didn't need to happen. Authorities had been aware for years that the killer was living illegally in this country, but they refused to deport him because he had rights. Even now, most in the news media will not report the fact that he was an illegal alien. Telling you that might discredit Joe Biden's immigration policy. Again, this is not natural. It is a manufactured disaster. It's not a tornado. It's not an act of God. The Biden administration did this on purpose, and they're still doing it. And that is exactly why Democrats become hysterical when you mention the obvious successes that are on display here in Hungary on the immigration question. They don't want you to know that there's an option to the chaos and filth and crime growing all around us. We don't have to live like that anymore. Actually, we could have a functioning country. All we'd have to do is to uphold our own laws, the ones already on the books. But that's not happening. Instead, the administration is using American courts to encourage more illegal immigration from other countries. In his immigration plan, Joe Biden proposes millions more in federal dollars to lawyers in order to defend foreign nationals caught entering our country. So as an American citizen, you can be summarily fired from your job for not taking the unapproved COVID vaccine. Yet if you sneak into our country violating our laws and you're COVID positive coming from Haiti or Brazil or Ghana or Honduras, you get a free lawyer, you get free housing, and then you get free health care. So watching all this, after a while, you begin to wonder, what's the point of having American citizenship? What's the point of paying your taxes? Other smaller countries, far less privileged places, have figured this out. Here's footage that we just shot in Budapest. Notice as you watch it what you don't see. There are not tent cities of drug addicts living in the parks here. There isn't garbage and human waste littering the sidewalks. People don't get beheaded at intersections. BLM is not allowed to torch entire neighborhoods in Budapest. That's how Americans used to live before our leaders decided they no longer cared about you. The Hungarian government protects its border because it wants to protect its citizens. That's the basic role of government. It's not a radical concept. It used to be commonplace across the world, especially in the United States, and now it's not. Here's the Prime Minister of Hungary explaining it, Viktor Orban.
This is our country, this is our population, this is our history, this is our language, so we have to do that. Of course, if you are in trouble and there is nobody closer to you than the Hungarians, you have to be helpful. But you can't say simply that, okay, it's a nice country, I would like to come here and to live here because it's a nicer life. This is not a human right to come here. No way, because it's our land. It's a nation, it's a community, families, history, tradition, language.
Ooh, they're so triggered by that. Family, history, tradition, language, quote. They hate it when you say that, but why? Those are all good things. In fact, they're the things that unite a country, particularly a huge continental country that's multi-ethnic. You need those things. It's not hard to have a decent country. It's not complicated. You just need leaders who want one. Stephen Miller is a former White House advisor. He joins us tonight. Stephen Miller, thanks so much for coming on. You're an expert in the details of immigration policy, but let me ask you to pull out just for a second. as you see the Biden administration letting in the world, promising them benefits that in many cases American citizens don't get, and then allowing them to violate their own COVID restrictions to come here. What do you see? What does that add up to?
Let's get to first principles. This is about degrading the meaning of American citizenship and, in a very ritualized way, debasing American citizens themselves. Joe Biden recently invited the group of illegal aliens to the White House, and his top domestic policy advisor, Susan Rice, put out a message on social media saying that those illegal aliens are Americans, period, not to be questioned, and then went further and said, and we will fight to secure their future. The message from your government is that you, as an American citizen, are unworthy. You are not entitled to the defense or protection of your laws. You're not entitled to the maintenance of your heritage. You are not entitled to be treated with priority over the citizens of any other country. In fact, your needs are to come last. That is the message being sent. That is the policy being implemented. So we don't just have an unprecedented border crisis, Tucker. We have a legitimacy crisis, we have a constitutional crisis, and we have a moral crisis. Because for the first time, and I really mean this, for the first time in the entire history of this country, we have a government that is openly disloyal and disdainful of its own citizens. That has never happened before.
Yeah. So, I mean, this could develop into a crisis because our system is based on voluntary behavior. It works, the government is funded, our institutions exist because normal law-abiding middle-class people decide to support it by obeying the law, by paying their taxes, by playing along. And, you know, you jeopardize that at a certain point, and that's a nightmare, and that's the last thing any decent American wants, but it feels like they're pushing the population to a point where people are not going to obey. Why are they doing that?
At bottom, Tucker, it is all about, and has always been about, political power. Mass illegal migration disenfranchises American citizens economically, socially, culturally, and it leaves them feeling helpless and hopeless. In other words, Americans fought not just for years, but for decades to pass every single immigration law that we have. They elected one Congress after another, one president after another, to declare that it is unlawful to enter the country in the way that people now are by the millions. So you do all that work, you participate in all of those elections, you do your faithful duty as a citizen, and you look and it all adds up to nothing. So it leaves you demoralized, it leaves you dispirited, it leaves you feeling completely hopeless. Who's empowered by it? Multinational corporations who get cheaper wages, activist groups that are able to get extra money from the federal government, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and the politicians themselves. More than all of this, it is about unwinding the very social fabric of our country. You mentioned earlier, we are a country that has people who come from many, many different places. That makes it all the more important that we elevate citizenship above everything else in this country. We hold it as sacred.
That's exactly
what they are doing instead is they are saying to every citizen and everyone watching tonight, you don't matter, your family doesn't matter, your children don't matter, but the people in other countries and other places to whom we actually know no allegiance, they are the only ones who matter, not you.
I think they're playing a really reckless game, and this is a great country. I don't think we should destroy it or let them.
No.
Stephen Miller, I appreciate your coming on. Thank you.
Thank you.
So does your employer have a right to know details about your medical history, what you're infected with, what you're not infected with? Can you be fired for not taking a medicine you don't want or need? It didn't used to be. Suddenly that's happening in America, even on another cable news channel. We'll get to details in a minute.
Was not going to be mandatory, and I got an email all of a sudden changing course telling me that it was now going to be mandatory, and even when I got that email, I figured it was still open to a conversation. So, I emailed back just expressing my concerns over fertility. Once there's more research, I would be open to changing my stance on it. And I would also be happy to speak to them more about it in person. Also, I think it's very important to mention I gave an alternative option. I said I would continue to get tested regularly.
That was Bonnie Jacobson. She was a waitress in New York. She was fired for asking questions about the COVID vaccines. No questions allowed. Her employer decided that she did not have the right to control what drugs go into her body. It was not her body, her choice. They've been lying to all these years. So they took her job away. Now, when that happened, we predicted this would become much more common in America because fascism always spreads, and increasingly it has spread. We've just learned that at CNN, being unvaccinated is a far more serious offense than, say, masturbating on a video call with your coworkers or lying about Russian collusion. We know that from an internal memo that the head of the channel, Jeff Zucker, just sent to employees. Quote, "We've been made aware of 3 employees who are coming to the office unvaccinated. All 3 have been terminated." You should know that Jeffrey Toobin, the masturbator, remains employed by the network. A couple questions remain here. Who are these 3 employees who were fired from CNN? Clearly, they're not CNN anchors. We know one of CNN's primetime anchors exposed other people to COVID when he was infected with it last winter. He's still there. Are they high-level people, or are they more likely studio technicians, potentially African-American studio technicians? And how did CNN learn about their vaccination status? What else do they know about people's medical histories over there? Those employees have not publicly been named yet, but they are always welcome on this show, so give us a call. And it's not just CNN, we should tell you. The CEO of one of Houston's biggest hospitals has just announced that all of his workers must be vaccinated.
What difference has your vaccine requirement made?
Oh, I'm so pleased that we did the vaccine mandate, and so thankful to all of our employees for stepping up and getting vaccinated. Unfortunately, most hospitals took too long to do this and are not benefiting from this, and I'm hopeful that many, many more will follow suit soon.
So the question is, why did healthcare workers need a mandate to get vaccinated? Why wouldn't they just get vaccinated? They're healthcare workers. They don't know enough about medicine or COVID, but they choose not to get the vaccine. Why did they make that choice? Why'd you have to force them? Mr. Hairspray didn't ask that question, but it might be worth asking. In the meantime, we have legal questions, and that's why we're grateful to be joined tonight by Harmeet Dillon, the famed civil rights attorney. She joins us now. Harmeet, thanks so much for coming on. So can CNN fire employees for being HIV positive, too?
No, they can't, Tucker. In fact, this is a unique situation where the government is allowing private employers to fire people for the type of protected categories that would otherwise be respected in the law. And you have to ask some questions about why it is that we're treating someone's vaccination status on an experimental vaccine differently than, say, pregnancy or having herpes or some other type of communicable disease, Tucker.
So the Biden administration has decided that this is the one health category over which you have no expectation of privacy. People can just get right in your face and ask you about a private medical decision. Then they can force it on you if you don't want it or if you don't need it. And they don't have to give exemptions for people who have active antibodies and are almost certainly more protected against COVID than the vaccinated. But why aren't they forced to give that exemption?
Well, they should be, Tucker. And in fact, a good friend of mine from college and law school, Professor Todd Zwicky at the Scalia Law School, filed a lawsuit earlier this week on that exact issue. He's a survivor of COVID, and his physicians have told him it's actually more dangerous for him to get vaccinated. It puts him in a worse status medically than the natural antibodies he has that are as good as the best vaccines and far better than all the other vaccines. And you know, I was discussing this with him, and in the educational context, and this may apply to employment as well, the school is even allowing the vaccines from China, which are frankly garbage. And you know, the theory is that they want as many of those foreign Chinese students to be able to study there. And so this is a huge civil rights crisis, Tucker. It's going to be a lot of litigation.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that comes soon. Harmeet Dillon, thanks so much. Good to see you tonight.
My pleasure.
Obviously, we're in the middle of a moral panic driven by politicians who are dividing us for their own power. But if you face this, if your employer tries to force you to get medicine you don't need and threatens to fire you if you don't, our unsolicited advice is resist, threaten to sue, make a lot of noise. Don't go along with it. You're an American. You don't have to. We promised you last night to reveal the names of every Republican who supports the lunatic infrastructure bill that Joe Biden is pushing for very good reason. We have their names. We're going to show them to you. The infrastructure bill is winding its way through the Senate. A lot going on. You may have missed this, but you should know it is moving without meaningful Republican opposition. That means, unless something changes very soon, it will become law. Here's what you should know about that bill. It's 2,700 pages long. It will cost more than $1 trillion. It will not pay for itself, just by what they told you. And much of it has nothing whatsoever to do with infrastructure, meaning fixing our crumbling roads and bridges and airports and train stations and all the rest that embarrasses Americans. Instead, this bill will make science denial official. It will enshrine gender identity in federal law. It would allow the government to track your driving. Why? So they can charge you a fee for every mile you go. This in addition to the gas tax. And scariest of all, this bill requires all new vehicles in the United States to come with monitoring technology, such as eye scanners or breathalyzers. And that means that going forward, you will need the express permission of your federal overlords before you start your car in the morning, because it's their car now. As of tonight, 20 Republican senators appear to support this lunacy. The final vote is this weekend, so if you have views about this, you might want to let them know right away. They assume you're not paying attention, so they can do whatever they want to you, and in this case they are. Here are the 17 Republicans who have already voted to move this bill forward, listed in alphabetical order. Roy Blunt, Richard Burr, Shelley Moore Capito, Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, Kevin Kramer, Mike Crapo, Lindsey Graham, of course, Chuck Grassley, John Hoeven, Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, Rob Portman, Jim Risch, Mitt Romney, Tom Tillis, and Todd Young. Now, a few of these people plan to retire soon, thank heaven, but most of them intend to get reelected at some point. And it might be good if voters made that impossible. A YouTube personality called Chris Chan has just been arrested in Virginia on, of all things, incest charges. Authorities say Chan was having sex with his 79-year-old mother who has dementia. Chris Chan is a biological man, but he identifies as a woman. Reportedly, Virginia authorities initially went along with that. They classified Chris Chan as a female, and that means Chris Chan, who is an accused sex criminal, would have been housed in a women's jail. We understand that decision has been reversed, likely due to public pressure. It became public, unfortunately, for the state of Virginia, and Chan is now being considered a man by the jail. But this is not an isolated incident. Many prisons in this country do house biological men with women. This is something we predicted, many predicted, and were laughed at. Kara Dansky is one of the people who predicted this. She's the president of the U.S. chapter of the Women's Human Rights Campaign, and she joins us tonight. Kara, thanks so much for coming on. I remember very vividly when you said on our air, if we don't put the brakes on this, we're going to get men housed in women's prisons, and you were called hysterical or silly or whatever. Now you're actually seeing it happen. What's your reaction to it?
Absolutely. We know for a fact that California passed SB 132 last year. It went into effect in January of this year. We see approximately 300 applications from male prisoners to be housed in a women's prison in California. We approximate that 20 of them have been granted. There are 20 men being housed in women's prisons in California now, as far as we know. We suspect that none of the applications has been denied. We also know that in Washington state, approximately 9 male convicted felons are being housed in a women's prison. One of those men has been convicted of multiple murders of women, and another one of those men has been convicted of raping a 12-year-old girl. We know that in states all over this country, there are various policies or actual statutory laws on the books that allow for this, in fact, mandate it.
I mean, I'm not in the habit of, carrying the banner for prison inmates, but this is cruel and unusual. And even if you've been convicted of a crime as a woman, you have an expectation that you're not going to be raped in jail. I mean, has anyone brought this to court? It's so over the top, outrageous.
A couple things. One is, yes, these women are being held under absolutely torturous conditions, and there's some reporting coming out really reported that one woman in a California prison has been pregnant and that the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is distributing condoms. Now, what this tells to me is not only that do California prison officials understand and anticipate that these men will be raping these women, they also understand that these people being transferred to women's prisons are not women, they are men. It completely uncovers the lie that, quote unquote, trans women are men. trans women are women, and California prison officials know that.
Well, sure. If everyone in the prison was female, you probably wouldn't be distributing condoms at taxpayer expense.
The reason that they are doing this is because, yes, exactly. If these prisoners being transferred were women, pregnancy would not be a concern. This should be obvious to everyone. But the problem is that most people in America have no idea that this is going on.
Is there anybody, and I think there's so many issues, who can stop this, who can, and again, I just want to say, I don't care if you're in prison as a woman, you don't have to face, this is torture, and you shouldn't be subjected to it. Is there anyone who could stop this?
It absolutely could go to court, and I should also note it is in blatant violation of international norms that require the separation of prisoners by sex. It's also worth noting the vast majority of women in prison have not committed a violent offense, and women tend to be housed under lower security restrictions than men do. So what this is going to mean is that either when men get transferred to women's prisons, they will be held under conditions that are of lower security than they ordinarily would, or officials are going to have to increase security in women's prisons.
Right. And women are held with more lax security because they're far less prone to commit sex crimes until you put men into the female population. This is truly insane. And you called it really, really early. And I remember the derision you faced for saying that. And you've been proven right, unfortunately. Kara Dansky, thank you.
Thank you.
So this probably is not going to surprise you, but a lot of the people who push the defunding police lunacy on the country, the stuff that destroyed our cities and killed thousands of people, have been caught with private security that you're paying for. One of them just got forced to explain why she's doing this on camera. Is she embarrassed? Wait till you see this tape. We'll be right back, Carlson, tonight. Now, defund the police, which was the battle cry of the left, has borne fruit. And it's destroyed cities across the country. Thousands of people have died because of it as the crime rate spikes. But the neighborhoods of the people who called for defunding the police are exempt. They have private security, lots of private security. We know this for a fact. Federal filings show that Sandy Cortez, for example, a big defund the policer, has spent thousands of dollars this year on personal bodyguards for herself, including ex-Blackwater contractors. Everything is Animal Farm now. But that's nothing compared to the bill that Cori Bush of Missouri has racked up. In less than 3 months this year, Cori Bush spent nearly $70,000 in campaign funds for her own personal police force. And at the same time as she was surrounded by armed bodyguards that donors were paying for, she was calling for you to lose your police protection. Now, she was asked on Wednesday how exactly this works. And as you watch this tape, imagine the reaction of the Chinese in Beijing as they watch this. Jaws open, thinking, this is who runs the United States? We're in good shape. Ladies and gentlemen, Cori Bush.
I'm going to make sure I have security because I know I have had attempts on my life and I have too much work to do. There are too many people that need help right now for me to allow that. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend $10 more on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety nets because we're trying to save lives.
I'm going to make sure I have security, so suck it up and defund the police, your police. Just look at that cold. Let's say you're from a foreign country and you saw that, you would think to yourself, whatever political party she's aligned with should have no power. That's too crazy. It's too stupid. It's too reckless. By the way, all the billionaires who are funding the DAs who've made our country far safer, the ones more dangerous rather, the ones who are letting murderers out of jail in places like LA and New York and Chicago and Philadelphia. They don't care if you die, they never did. But Cori Bush just made it explicit. She really doesn't care. So the country is more politically polarized than it's ever been, largely because of so-called leaders like the ones you just saw. The people in charge of our country don't seem that interested about the lives of American citizens. They just want to be more powerful. You wonder, how long can a system like this go on? Michael Anton has thought a lot about that question. He's a former speechwriter, a former national security official in the last administration, and he sat down for us with a long and fascinating conversation on Tucker Carlson tonight on Fox Nation. Here's part of it.
In the competing two models, the blue state model versus the red state model, it seems to me there's a real serious will on the part of the blue side to rule the reds.
Yes.
And the reds both have no desire, from what I can tell, to rule the blues, but they really also don't want to be ruled by the blues without their consent.
The red states are kind of the Ottoman Empire. You can kind of practice your own weird sectarian religion if you want, unmolested. And the blue states are like the Soviet Empire. Like, you have to read the catechism or else you're in deep trouble.
Yeah, and that's a problem. And if these two governance models, as the thesis of the book kind of has it, are the contending for the future of the United States, they're not contending on equal terms.
No, they're not.
That is to say, they're not saying one of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose. Because I think the red model is, if you would just back off and let us live the way we want to live in certain ways, everything would be fine. I mean, a great example, to me, it's hugely important, is energy, right? There's almost no issue on which Texas and California differ more greatly. Leave aside the cultural issues for a second, but on a real public policy question, right? Texas has a thriving oil and gas sector. It's the most, the strongest in the union, probably. I think for sure. And Texas, as a public policy question, from the governor's office on down, is all in for this because they think it's good for the state, it's good for local companies, it's good for business, it's good for workers, right? We're all in on this. California sees itself, I'm sure other states too, but California, as this green energy pioneer. But there's no, in the California mindset, there's no possibility of peaceful coexistence because in their view, Texas's view is California, develop all the wind and solar you want, great. If it works out, we're rooting for you. We're going to do our own thing. The California mindset is Texas, as long as you are drilling oil and pulling gas up out of the ground and burning hydrocarbons, you're killing us all and we must force you to stop. They won't, it's hard to see what the basis of compromise on those two, on that issue is.
Yes.
Whereas, like I say, Texas is willing to compromise.
Theirs is an evangelical faith.
Yeah.
And it's almost like 8th century Islamic, actually. What happens if we don't do this?
I think the polarization will get worse and worse and worse. And, I think public opinion could eventually come to a breaking point. I mean, I guess you'd have to say there's two possibilities. One is the red parts of the country they give up and they say, all right, we're never going to get out from under and there's nothing we can do. In which case, I think you'll see, and you and I have talked about this before, we've already seen a certain amount of decline in lots of ways in red America. I mean, life expectancy down, the opioid crisis, jobs, all these things have happened. They induce hopelessness. They kind of suck the spirit out of areas, and they cease to thrive. I think that could happen if red America just feels like we've lost control of our destiny. Our rulers, are far off. You can't even petition them. They won't listen. They're going to do to us whatever they want to do. The other possibility is you could see some kind of, a real revolt. That is to say, if people make over time repeated good faith efforts to resolve this question politically at the ballot box, if through compromise, and are just told over and over and over again, no, you could see a backlash that could take a number of forms. I think the reason why we should start talking about this is because that backlash will not be good.
Michael Anton, that conversation went on for nearly an hour. It's all on a brand new episode of Tucker Carlson Today on FoxNation.com, and well worth it, we think. So it turns out that when you go to Hungary, you make a lot of people in Washington mad. Why do they get so mad? They don't like the contrast with the country they've created? Really? It's interesting. A tiny country in the middle of Central Europe, 10 million people, an economy smaller than New York State's. If you mention it, they're triggered. We'll think about why with Douglas Murray next.
We Hungarians decided not to take that risk, to mix up our society. That's the reason why they attack Hungary so harshly, and that's the reason why my personal reputation is very bad. I'm treated like the black sheep of the European Union personally.
That was Viktor Orban. He's the Prime Minister of Hungary. We came here this week to see what they've been doing to secure their borders, and it seems like a pretty happy little country. And how'd they do that? It's worth getting outside where you grew up and see how the rest of the world does things. people in Washington had a heart attack that we would dare do that. We could give you a million examples, but we just got this one. Someone just sent this to me. This is a tweet from one of the dumbest ladies at the Washington Post. I'm going to read this slowly because I don't have my glasses on, but it's good because you're going to want to catch every line and see how deeply this amuses you. Quote, in Orban's Hungary, more than 90% of the media is controlled by the ruling party. Businesses are physically and legally harassed if they don't toe the party line. Elections are manipulated. Party leaders are mysteriously rich. Does that sound like any place you know? Does that sound at all familiar to you? It sounds like my country, weirdly. That's not even true about Hungary, but whatever. Douglas Murray has spent time in Hungary, knows the Prime Minister, thought a lot about Europe, wrote one of the best books ever on Europe, The Strange Death of Europe, and one of our favorites. Of course, he joins us tonight. Douglas Murray, thanks so much for coming on. So I'm sure that there are things you don't like about Hungary or Orban. You don't live here, I notice. But the portrayal of Hungary as like the worst place on earth, it seems very important to a lot of the people running our country to say that. Why is it so important to them?
Yeah, I noticed this, first of all, really in 2015, when I noticed that Hungary had become the sort of whipping boy of the EU and indeed of the American left. And there was a reason for that, which was that year Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, opened the borders of Europe, said, come to the world's migrants from North Africa and the Middle East. And Viktor Orban was the only European leader, or at least the first European leader, to say no. We don't want millions of people who we don't know to walk into our country. And to put that into some perspective, that year, almost 1 million people walked illegally into Hungary. Hungary tried to get them through the country and to Germany as fast as possible. But just put that in American terms. Hungary, with a population of 10 million people, 1 million illegals coming in a number of months. That's equivalent to something like 33 million illegal migrants coming through the southern border of the United States in a matter of months. That's 3 times the estimated number of illegals currently in the US coming in a few months. So Hungary said, no, we can't cope with that. And after that, the demonization of the country and the demonization, not legitimate criticism, but the demonization of the Hungarian people started in earnest, and it has never stopped since.
So, I mean, it almost sounds, listening to the president speak, people at the State Department, that they would like regime change in Hungary. In fact, it doesn't almost sound that way, it sounds that way.
Yes. Yes, and it's very sinister because there is no evidence that Viktor Orban has rigged the elections. You may not like Viktor Orban. A lot of people in Europe, a lot of people in America don't like him. But there is no evidence that he has rigged the elections. So he is the legitimately elected leader, repeatedly elected leader of Hungary. And this extraordinary decision to just sort of decide that if you don't like somebody, if they're a conservative leader, that basically you can advocate regime change in a European democracy, which, let's remember, in the 20th century was very nearly erased repeatedly by fascists and then by communists. That country suffered so much in the 20th century. And in the 21st century, when Hungarians hear people in Washington and elsewhere talking about basically them not having a legitimate country and outside powers having to intervene, they get very worried. And I think they're right to feel worried, and they're right to feel sore about the treatment that they get.
It's actually making me mad. Just hearing your characterization is so precisely true that it really is embarrassing as an American to hear it. Douglas Murray, thanks so much.